Hi and welcome to the FPL Stats Fix for Game Week 35 with me, Tom Campbell. In this week's video, we're going to be taking a deep dive look at Kevin De Bruyne. Let's get right into it. Hi everyone and welcome to the FPL Stats Fix. I hope that everyone's Game Week 34 is going well. I'm saying is because the game week still rumbles on. I am recording this video, guys, on Tuesday, so there is actually a degree of risk about recording this video, mid-game week, and more so than usual, because Man City have yet to play their huge Champions League semi-final against Real Madrid. So there is a chance that this could be rendered pretty redundant. Let's hope that that is not the case and that Kevin De Bruyne comes through that game unscathed, because as we're going to find out as I go into the stats that are available on fantasyfootballfix.com, the idea that I'm suggesting here is when we're looking at which Man City players we want to consider bringing into our squads, it would do worse than to seriously consider Kevin De Bruyne. Now, in last week's FPL Stats Fix video, I talked about the temptation to go big at the back, and I remain convinced that that is a legitimate strategy for FPL managers to use, and the stats did back that up. And the temptation would be to look at the Man City backline there. Indeed, I've trebled up, actually. But what I would say about that is that there is a compelling case, actually, to look further offensively in the Man City team, and that Kevin De Bruyne is very much the standout. So the idea of today's video is to basically look at how Kevin De Bruyne has performed over the season, more recently as well, what's leaping out in terms of his underlying numbers, and see whether or not we can actually recommend via the stats on fantasyfootballfix.com that you should spend the money and bring Kevin De Bruyne into your FPL squad. So I've brought up the analog box here, which you can pick up just when you're on your assistant manager tab, using Fix, and then you can get a whole suite of stats, actually. So this analog box gives a nice overview, I find, in terms of the sort of salient points there from how he's performed. And straight away you can see what's leaping out here is that it is going to cost you a fortune, guys. It is 11.8 million to spend on the Man City midfielder. So straight away that could be problematic, but I am mindful that people do have free hit chips to use. Some people will be looking to use their wildcards as well, so there will be the opportunity for, you know, making changes and rebalancing the funds throughout your squad. So it is going to cost you a lot of money. If we look at the ownership and how that differs from all teams compared to live, it's actually pretty attractive. So it's under 10% there for all teams and right around the 11.5% mark for live teams. So not massively owned. So there is a degree of being able to differentiate your team from your peers in your mini leagues. So that kind of ticks that box as well. Now, in terms of the upcoming fixtures, we'll look at that in a little moment. But what we can see here is that through game weeks 28 through game week 34, which is the one that is currently ongoing, you can see that De Bruyne has really kind of stepped up in terms of his output from a points perspective there, with double-digit hauls in 2 of the last 6 game weeks, in game week 28 and game week 31 respectively. But look at that consistency as well, guys, in terms of most recently against Watford, the 9-pointer. He's had 6-pointer, another 9-pointer. There was an away match at Palace, which if you watch that game, goodness me, he was close to returning as well, but, you know, still picked up the 3 points there. So the actual points returns over sort of recent form is really what is making De Bruyne stand out to me. And again, if we look at the longer lens, it's still compelling, but maybe not quite as compelling as his more recent form. If we wanted to look at the fixtures, which is always something that we would advocate to do, just diving into the upcoming fixtures tab here rather than looking at team level, which is what we normally do here, guys, you can see that these are the teams that, you know, you'd be attracted to anyway. Leeds, Newcastle, who've been awesome recently. Fair dues to them, but still a nice fixture. You would think for the title elect, or the challenges for the Premier League title. An away match against West Ham, who may still be competing in European competition, and Aston Villa, and of course there is actually the game against Wolves, which at the time of recording has not yet been rescheduled. So there will be another fixture in there. Now, Man City, as we know, are in this absolutely incredible title race with Liverpool. So my feeling is that Kevin De Bruyne is very unlikely to be risked in terms of rotating him out of the team because of how integral he is to how they perform, in terms of how close that battle with Liverpool is. So I feel like he is someone who we can be relatively sure he will feature in those games. The more astute of you will have noticed that there were some reduced minutes here. They tended to be after the games had been well won, and De Bruyne had actually picked up those points already. So I don't necessarily think minutes played is going to be a huge concern for De Bruyne, and those upcoming fixtures are attractive. Now, if I move on and just you can see the projected points here, guys. If I move on and take a look at it's this one that I wanted to take a look at. So this is the upcoming fix has got predicted points and stats for game week range. So I've just applied it throughout the rest of the season, which is effectively 4 game weeks. We know that Man City will have a double game week in that period as well, guys. So what if you were looking at this overall, then De Bruyne wouldn't necessarily feature as highly because a lot of the other teams who have higher points projections include already scheduled double game weeks, whereas Man City don't yet have that. So it's a little bit misleading. So what I've done instead is I've included the full range, 35 through to the end of the season, 38. And if I then filter just on the upcoming game week 35, you can see De Bruyne is right behind only Mo Salah in terms of how Fix is anticipating he will perform in the next game week. And you can see that this consistency of expected output just in single game weeks. And as I say, not to repeat myself too much, but one of these game weeks will feature a double game week as well, with Wolves needing to be parachuted into one of those game weeks, expected to be 36 or 37 as yet unconfirmed, guys. But you can get an idea of the expected consistency here, with the fact that there will be another game to be played. And as I say, I would expect Kevin De Bruyne to feature in that game. So yes, 11.8 million, absolute fortune that you'd need to find the money for. I'm sure it would take some rebalancing, but if you do have chips, it is something to consider. Fix is suggesting that this is a guy who's going to be returning consistently in single game weeks, and we know that that will inflate once that other game week gets rearranged. So keep your eye out for that, of course. So what I decided to do after that, so we're kind of suggesting that predicted points we like. We understand that the availability or the security of selection, I guess, for Pep Guardiola is always questionable. But with the title race being what it is, I'd expect De Bruyne to continue to feature prominently. So let's just now see whether or not his performance has actually stacked up as well as I believe it did. So using the OptaStats Sandbox, another cool tool that I really enjoy using on the Fix desktop site, I've reduced the game week range here from game week 28 through to the end of the season, so the last 6 game weeks in effect. And I'm just looking at the midfielders here, which is obviously going to include some pretty powerhouse players if you consider that the Liverpool attacking players tend to be thought of or categorized as midfielders. And I'm looking at per game stats as well. So if I scroll down here now, I'm looking at, there's key metrics here. You can see De Bruyne straight away is at the top of the billing. Now, this is just looking at, if I filter this on points, you can see over the course of that period, he's been the standout per game in terms of the actual points that he's accruing. So the underlying metrics are all well and good, and we tend to use them in a kind of predictive standpoint on this show particularly. But actually, that's actually been translating into points. And compared to all other midfielders in the game over that period, he's picked up the most points, I should say. If I change that to expected FPL points, because sometimes the delta can be pretty different or pretty significant, it's not here. Well, I mean, the gap is, but the actual chart, I guess, still has De Bruyne out in top. So in terms of how he was expected to perform in terms of expected FPL points during that period, Kevin De Bruyne still leads the way ahead of some pretty powerhouse players, as I say, in terms of Mo Salah and Heung-min Son respectively. And then you scroll down and it starts to be sort of less fashionable, I guess. Although Saka clearly a very talented player playing in a well-performing Arsenal team, but you get the point. He's actually having expected to have returned in that period as well as actually generating the output. If I change to the kind of more underlying stats now, so in terms of the expected assists during that period, he tops the bill there as well. He's ahead of Kulusevski of Tottenham, for example, Jack Grealish in the Man City team as well. Yes, there's a massive difference in price. I do get that is not insignificant and shouldn't be brushed over. But if we can make it work in our team selection and your budget, then you're selecting the player that's returned the most, or is in terms of expected assists during that period was way out in front. Now XG, I would expect there to be a drop off because of the role that he performs, and indeed we do see that drop. He doesn't actually feature. I'd need to scroll down to find him onto page 2. I think we saw it was a 0.22 was the delta there, so that effectively that's 1 in 5 or just over 1 in 5. You could generously round up, I guess, to 1 in 4. But he is still returning points. It does tend to be more along the creative side, and I really like the attempted assist metric that Fantasy Football Fix uses rather than expected assist in isolation. Attempted assist. Look at that, guys. He is attempting 4 assists, or attempting to create goals 4 times per game, or has done over that period, which is just obliterating the the peers in that midfield complement: Odegaard, Maddison, Ward-Prowse, Saka, etc. Nowhere near that number of 4 per game, and that as we know, Kevin De Bruyne is an absolute wizard when it comes to creating. Fair dues to Kulusevski as well. He's managed to outdo that in terms of the actual output there, and in terms of FPL assists during that period as well. He has played more, although this is an average stat as well. So you can see there, my feeling is that Kevin De Bruyne's performance over the last 6 games is really where he stands out. So with that in mind, what I thought it would be kind of interesting to do, this is not an error. I've decided on the left-hand side here, they're not doppelgangers, they are the same player. But in the first, or the left-hand column here, I've got De Bruyne, how he performed game weeks 1 through 27. And then just looking at the period that we're interested in terms of the last 6 game weeks, and see whether or not we can see whether or not there's any difference in how he's performed, because clearly he's, his output has been so exemplary. So if I scroll down, you can see straight away, we'll look at the heat map to start with. My observations here, obviously it's a longer period, but my observations here is there did tend to be more of an activity in a wider area in that first part of the season, first kind of 2/3 of the season as played so far. Whereas now you can see that slightly more central bias in terms of how he's performing, and whether or not that's going to yield more chances or more abilities to create chances, that's certainly a possibility. So I quite liked that kind of factor from playing slightly more inside right rather than wider. And that's played out in the number of crosses, actually, which we'll show down as we scroll down. So that was the first observation there. But I personally think that that's an advantage in terms of being able to be closer to the penalty box in a kind of rudimentary sense. If we scroll down, I direct your eyes to this part here. So this is the average attacking radar per 90, and the darker one is the one that we're interested here. As you can see, the kind of output here, it's not definitive in terms of not across all metrics, but there is a slight preferential, I guess, treatment in terms of the right-hand side as well, which again is encouraging in terms of shots in the box. Goal assists, expected assists, attempted assists is the same, but he's a world-class player, so I wouldn't necessarily expect massive difference, but there is an improvement there. If we scroll down, these are overall, so I don't think they're particularly indicative of how they perform, because obviously way more games played in the left-hand side, so we need to look at the more average, at the averages for it to become more contextual and more meaningful. So blue is the winner on the right-hand side, so we can see in the last 6 game weeks compared to the first, game week 1 through 27, goals, expected goals, for example, both ahead more recently. Shots is close, but fair dues. He was slightly favouring the first section, or I guess period that we were looking at. But then if you actually look at these underlying numbers in terms of shots on target being 1.7 compared to 1.1, shots in the box 1.7 compared to 1.4, goal assists way higher at 0.75 per game, so touching the 1 per game, which would, if you could guarantee that would be happy days. Expected assists is marginally improved, and attempted assists as well. Look at that, guys. It's so impressive. Attempted assists over that period of between sort of 4 and 5 per game. Big chances created. Can't ignore the fact that the quality of the chances that he was creating, maybe from that wider position, because he's so good at crossing into that penalty area to the likes of Diaz and Laporte, who were so prevalent in the air. That might explain that. But certainly I think there's enough there to suggest that there's, an improvement in terms of the underlying numbers, in terms of that which are expected to yield points. So definitely something that I would recommend there. I thought just lastly, obviously this is one of your Man City spots. I think it's probably essential. Well, essential is a dirty word in FPL parlance, isn't it? But it's certainly something that we would encourage, I guess, in terms of having 3 Man City and 3 Liverpool, in terms of just how much better they are than everyone else in the league. I did just think, okay, let's see how De Bruyne has performed in that period, again, the last 6 game weeks, versus all of the other players in the Man City squad, and just see how they're returning. So I've gone to the FPL suite of stats here rather than the key ones here. So this is all of Man City's players. And if I look at expected FPL points, now Jesus has just come off of that absolutely monster haul against Watford in the last game week. So he now features way higher than he would have done if we'd done this analysis just prior to that. Clearly, all points count and he needs to be included. But, straight away you can see De Bruyne just behind him there in terms of, and again, guys, this is average per game, should say that. Over that period, we're looking at over 6 points per game for Kevin De Bruyne. If we actually then start looking at, some of the other metrics, bonus point system, De Bruyne, again, over 30 BPS points per game. Actual bonus points, he's leading the way with over 1.5, so bordering on 2 per game that you would have expected, or that you picked up over that period as well. Assists, I'm expecting that to be dominant. Fair do, Sterling is rivaled him as well, so that's kind of interesting. Let's just, because I'm intrigued here. Yeah, I guess we've kind of looked at these already, but the attempted, he's going to be way out in front for all of these stats. Attempted, big chances created. I guess the quality of the chances, the one thing that worries me a little bit, not worries, but something to be aware of, but the quality of the chances, or how likely they are to be big chances, hardest chance to create, of course, slightly down, but the expected assists, regardless, just because of the sheer volume he's creating, I think, is still really encouraging. 0.4 if you're rounding up, and yeah, definitely something to recommend. So look, the Ginger Prince for Man City, I really do think that this is something that we as FPL managers, as we have 4 game weeks left, we know that Man City will play 5 games. I'm expecting, as long as the title race is live, that De Bruyne will feature absolutely prominently. He is in exceptional form, guys, and I think you could do a lot worse than to look to try and find that 11.8 million and get him into your sides. So get your comments in below. Let me know, is Kevin De Bruyne in your side? Will you be bringing him in for game week 35, or are you going to wait and do it later? Is he somebody that you just can't manufacture into your team, and is he someone you're worried about? Do let us know in the comments down below. Do please smash a like on the video on your way out. Do please subscribe to fantasyfootballfix.com. Subscribe to this YouTube channel as well. Lots more content to come, guys, in the remainder of the FPL season. I wish you the very best of luck in game week 35, and I look forward to talking to you all next week. Goodbye.